Hello and welcome to this PHPMyAdmin quick starter guide. So if you're not familiar with PHPMyAdmin, I'm going to take you through how to create, browse, edit and drop databases, tables and columns. In addition, we'll go through how to back up and restore data. Now this is a quick starter reference guide, so have a look in the contents or the comments of this video and you'll see links to different sections of this video. So feel free to skip ahead to different sections that you're interested in. And of course, don't forget to subscribe if you like the content. There's plenty more content coming, including databases and other web development technologies. So let's start off with the common question. How do you actually access PHPMyAdmin? So I'm assuming that you know what PHPMyAdmin is, and potentially there's two ways of accessing this. Or common ways. If you're using a local server, you're going to be using XAMPP, WAMP, LAMP, MAMP, and so on. So you can access through the through the browser in the URL. You're going to type in localhost / and then PHPMyAdmin, or you're going to use a loopback address and then PHPMyAdmin. Alternatively, if you're using a domain hosting, typically you'll have access to a cPanel. So inside of a cPanel, you'll probably see an icon there, or you'll see an indication where you can select and access PHPMyAdmin. Either way, you'll be looking at the same interface that I'm looking at. Okay, so let's start off creating databases. So upon entering PHPMyAdmin, on the left-hand side, you'll notice a list of items, and at the top here we have new. So to make a new database, you can either select new here or just type in the name of the database and then press create. So next up, we build some tables. So here you've got two options. If you selected a database that already has tables, you'll notice you'll need to move down to the bottom to create a new table. If, for example, like we've just done, created a new database here, you'll find that the create table is at the top. Now to create a new table, you just need to type in the name of the table and how many columns you want to add. Now you can change this at a later date, so if you make a mistake, it's not a problem. So press go, and this now presents the information that you need to enter to create the actual table. So here, for example, we've got the fields in the table, and you enter the type of data that you want to enter. And then typically you then enter the lengths. Obviously, there's some more information here, which you can add depending on the type of data or table you want to create. So once you finish creating a table, you can press save. We need to add some lengths. So once you've created a table, you'll find now the new table structure is available. Now, if you want to add more to your table, then you've got this option here. So in the database, you select the table and go to structure. And inside of structure, you've got this option here. So add one after test, after ID, or at the beginning of a table. So you can select where you want to add a new row. So if I add a new row after test, I can press go, add a new piece of information, go back to browse, and you can now see that was added. I'll go back to the structure, and there's a structure in place. So that, in the most simplest way, is how to create tables utilizing PHPMyAdmin. So how do you browse a table? So first of all, just select the database you want to browse. And then inside of here, select the table. So we've utilized structure to actually see the structure of the table, but you can actually browse the table inside the Browse tab. So notice that there isn't any data here. So if I go to Insert, I can insert some data and press go. And if I go back now to Browse, you can see that data has been inserted. Now, if you utilize a primary key, it will allow you to actually edit this data on the fly. So let's go back to structure, and then let's just add the ID as a primary key. So if I do that and now go back to browse, you'll see now I have the option of actually editing the data as it stands. So ultimately with PHPMyAdmin, you have two options, browse and structure, to view the data, or the structure of the table. Editing data in the table. So in the previous step, I showed you how to access the data in the table and edit it directly from the screen. So you just need to make sure that you have a primary key. If we go back to structure, you need to make sure you got the primary key in the table, and that then allows you to access the data via browse. Now, it probably isn't commonplace for you to, once you've got lots of data, to actually edit it via this system. Typically, your actual software will give you access to the data and you'd edit the data through there. Alternatively, PHPMyAdmin does allow you to enter SQL statements directly from the interface here. So you could create update statements from here, for example. But ultimately, like I said, your software will probably give you all the functionality where you can edit the data. Or alternatively, if you want to make small changes, like I said, as long as you have a primary key, you can edit the data directly from the Browse tab. So next up is deleting a table. So to actually delete a table is fairly straightforward. We just need to select the database we want to delete from, and then select the table and then press drop. So in database terms, delete is referred to as drop. So we can drop this table and now it's gone. So how do you delete a database? Again, this is fairly straightforward. There's two ways of doing this. We can select or double click on this icon here next to the name of the database. That takes us to the area here where we can drop the database. Now, alternatively, if we were just to select the database and then select operations, we can then select the drop the database. So again, the word drop refers to delete. So let's remove this database, press OK. Of course, alternatively, we could again just utilize the SQL area and actually just use the command drop to drop a database if you prefer to use that method. So if you are familiar with the SQL language and using SQL, by all means utilize the SQL option to do all of your functionality. So deleting a table column. This may not need any explanation, but here I am inside of a database, inside of a table called person. I enter the structure tab and here I've got the option to drop. So if I wanted to drop something, just select drop and it's removed. Something that you should become familiar with is backing up your database. So the most common problem with backing up a database is forgetting to actually select the database you want to back up. Because it's too easy to forget that you have to be in the actual database, or you have to select the database in order to actually administrate that database. So just make sure that you've selected the database you want to work on and then select export. So from here, you have a few options. So probably one of the most common mistakes that users make is that they forget to select the actual database they want to work on. So before you make a backup, just make sure that you select the actual database that you want to work on and then press export. So here there are a few options in terms of what you want to export as, or how you want to export the data. So if you're using PHPMyAdmin and you know that you're going to import the data back into PHPMyAdmin, SQL here is going to be absolutely fine, this format. Of course, you'll know what format you'll want to develop for. Notice that you've got different options, for example, PDF, JSON, CSV. So I select SQL. I don't need to select anything else for a quick export. I press go and save, and then typically that ends up in the downloads folder. So what you've done there is made a backup of the whole database. If I right click and then open with or edit, here Notepad shows me the database. So here I've got the database name, which was user, and here is the SQL needed to create the table again. And there's no data here, but if there was data in the table, we could see the data and we know that that would be imported back in. Obviously at this point, you could make changes to the table. So for example, if you wanted to rename the table, you could do, and so on. So let's just delete this database. And we'll now just export the database back in. So here we go to home and I use the import. From here, I browse for the file. We know it's in the downloads folder and press open. So at this point, I just need to press go. Now, there is a problem here because what we did originally was we backed up the data in the database. Notice that there's an error here. It says database user. So in actual fact, what we need to do is create a new database first called user. Now we've done that, we can now go to import and browse for our file again and press go. And from here, you can see that everything is successful. And going back in the structure, you can see that we have our table back. So let's not forget that PHPMyAdmin is a interface, a graphical user interface which connects to our database. So in order to make a connection to our database, it needs a username and password. So some of you might come across the fact that your PHPMyAdmin isn't working because the username and password needs changing, or you may have changed your username and password to the database. So let's have a look at how to change the username and password. So I'm using XAMPP, so my database resides on the C drive in the XAMPP folder. And then here you'll see a folder called PHPMyAdmin. So if you're working from a different system, this might be slightly different, but what you're looking for here in PHPMyAdmin is a file. And that file is called config.inc. So if I open this up, you'll see that a few lines down, it has all the connectivity parameters. So you can see that I'm using the default root as the username to the database, and there's no password. So that's the default on XAMPP. So like I said, if you wanted to change the user or add more users to the database and use them for specific databases, then you may want to change some of these settings here so that you can connect to different databases. So we looked at how to back up a single database, but how do you back up all the databases on the system? So backing up the whole database or the complete PHPMyAdmin database set here, we can just select the home button, and from here we can select export. So we're not actually selecting a particular database. And from here we can just press go, and that would create a backup of all the databases. Now there is a custom option here. If you select it, you can actually then select the database, the single or multiple selections using the control button. There are some other additional selection or options here. So for example, if you wanted to back up tables individually, you could do that, for example. So it's well worth, if you're familiar to databases, looking through the different options, you'll probably have a better idea and know what you want to do. But if you're new to this and you want to just quickly back up everything, then just select the quick option and press go.